Good morning. I want to begin today by addressing the unfolding events in Afghanistan. We've been constantly monitoring the rapidly evolving situation, and I've been briefed by officials earlier this morning to get the latest developments on the ground. As always, the safety and security of Canadian personnel is our top priority. The current situation poses serious challenges to our ability to ensure that safety and security of our mission. So as of this morning, Canadian diplomatic personnel are on their way back to Canada. We thank them for their tireless efforts to help the people of Afghanistan in their pursuit of democracy, human rights, education, health, and security. Our commitment to the people of Afghanistan, including women and girls and the LGBTQ2 communities, remains unwavering. And we will honor the sacrifices of Canadians, our armed forces, diplomats, journalists, and civil society have made over the past years. Our government has also committed to resettling up to 20,000 Afghans through the ongoing Special Immigration Measures program. Our ongoing work to bring Afghans to safety in Canada under SIMS remains a top priority, and we will continue to work in close collaboration with partners and allies on this commitment. Ministers Garneau, Sajjan, and Mendicino will be continuing this work throughout the coming weeks. Canada firmly condemns the escalating violence, and we are heartbroken at the situation the Afghan people find themselves in today. This is especially so given the sacrifices of Canadians who believed and continue to believe in the future of Afghanistan. We will continue to work with allies and the international community to ensure that those efforts were not in vain. We are committed to Afghanistan and to the Afghan people. Merci de vous joindre à nous ici à Rideau Hall aujourd'hui. Il y a quelques instants, je me suis entretenu avec Son Excellence la gouverneure générale et elle a accepté ma demande de dissoudre le Parlement. Les Canadiens iront donc aux urnes le 20 septembre. My friends, it's been a big couple of years. The last 17 months have been like nothing we've ever experienced. And we're all wondering what the next 17 months, not to mention the next 17 years, will hold. A global pandemic, a global recession, a global climate crisis that's causing wildfires and flooding around the world. You're probably wondering what this means for you, for your job, for your kids, for your retirement, for your community, and for your country. Well, that's fair. But just look at what Canadians did in this time of crisis, in this time of uncertainty. When this pandemic struck, Canadians dug deep. You put on your mask to keep your neighbors safe. You followed public health rules, stayed home, and supported our frontline workers. And you rolled up your sleeves to lead the world on vaccinations. No one expected this crisis, but time and time again, community after community, you showed what mettle we're made of as Canadians. So don't stop now. If you haven't already, go get vaccinated. And if you have, talk to the person you know who still needs to get their shot. They won't necessarily be easy conversations, but they're important to have. We owe it to each other. Because with our actions, we show what it means to be Canadian. And now, more than ever, that matters. Look, COVID-19 wasn't something we expected as a government either. But just like you, we knew that staying true to who we are and what we believe in was the only path forward. So from day one, we focused on having your back. because that's what we stood for, because that's what we've always stood for. That's why we came to Ottawa in the first place, to build a government that would stand up for the middle class and people working hard to join it. That was the real change we delivered over the first 6 years. In fact, the very first thing we did was to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class. It's the real change we delivered by lifting hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty with the Canada Child Benefit. Real change by delivering clean drinking water to thousands of Indigenous people in over 100 communities. By building and refurbishing almost 200 schools so far so that tens of thousands of Indigenous kids have a better chance. It's a real change we delivered by pushing hard so that everywhere in the country there is a price on pollution, and then standing firm so that in no province is it free to pollute anymore. And those are the values that drove us to deliver the CERB and the wage subsidy to make sure that Canadians could get through this crisis too. On a choisi d'être là pour les familles et les travailleurs avec la PCU et la subvention salariale. On a soutenu les petites entreprises avec des prêts et de l'aide pour le loyer. Ce qu'on savait en 2015 et ce qui était encore plus clair en 2020 et depuis, c'est que notre avenir dépend de vous. Et on est toujours là pour se battre pour vous. We've had your back, and now it's time to hear your voice. The decisions your government makes right now will define the future your kids and grandkids grow up in. So in this pivotal, consequential moment, who wouldn't want a say? Who wouldn't want their chance to help decide where our country goes from here? Canadians need to choose how we finish the fight against COVID-19 and build back better. From getting the job done on vaccines to having people's backs all the way to and through the end of this crisis. For example, as a government, we chose to make sure that federal public servants and everyone boarding a train or a plane be vaccinated. Not everyone agrees. Not every political party agrees. Well, Canadians should be able to weigh in on that and on so much more. We believe that a government's most important responsibility is to keep Canadians safe and thriving, and that's what we'll continue to do. On a été là pour vous, et maintenant, c'est à vous de choisir. C'est à vous de vous exprimer. Les décisions que prend votre gouvernement maintenant vont définir l'avenir dans lequel vos enfants et vos petits-enfants vont grandir. On vit un moment historique et vous avez votre mot à dire. Vous aurez l'occasion de choisir la suite pour notre pays, que ce soit pour continuer nos efforts de vaccination ou pour le soutien offert aux gens jusqu'à la fin de cette crise. Tous les Canadiens devraient choisir comment on va terminer notre lutte contre la COVID-19 et comment on va rebâtir en mieux. Par exemple, en tant que gouvernement, on a choisi de s'assurer que les fonctionnaires fédéraux et toutes les personnes qui prennent un train ou un avion soient vaccinés. Ce n'est pas tout le monde qui est d'accord, et ce ne sont pas tous les partis politiques qui sont d'accord. Alors, les Canadiens devraient pouvoir exprimer leur point de vue. Nous, on croit que la plus importante responsabilité d'un gouvernement est de s'assurer que les Canadiens puissent s'épanouir en sécurité. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on va continuer de faire. I don't accept any party saying we shouldn't do everything we can to keep people safe and to end this pandemic and rebuild. And I certainly don't accept any politician saying you shouldn't have your choice on how to do that or on what comes next. Because as much as we've done over the past many, many months, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. We think families looking for childcare should get that now. We think workers deserve good middle-class jobs now. We think more ambition on climate change is needed now. That's what we think. So what do you think? You deserve a say, because this is your moment. C'est le moment, dès maintenant, de se battre encore plus fort pour un Canada sécuritaire et en santé. C'est le moment d'être encore plus ambitieux pour créer du logement, de travailler encore plus fort sur le chemin de la réconciliation, d'être plus audacieux pour protéger l'environnement et faire croître notre économie. Et mes amis, c'est le choix que vous avez à faire dans cette élection. To elders in long-term care homes and people who've worked hard for a good retirement but are struggling, I hear you when you say you deserve better. We're ready to make sure you get it. To parents thinking about how it just keeps getting more expensive to raise a family. To young people worried about how to afford a home. You're right. It is tough. Indeed, it's unacceptable. So we're going to continue investing in housing, and we're going to keep making life more affordable. To students raising your voices on the climate crisis, yes, I'm right there with you. This is a crisis. And yes, we're banning single-use plastics, and yes, we've won the fight for a price on pollution right across this country, but yes, that's not enough. Our planet and our future are at stake. So I need you alongside me in this fight, because together we can do so much more than we can apart. And to kids, you've missed birthdays and school days. This pandemic has hit you hard, and you stepped up to help your moms and dads, to help your community. And now we need to step up to make sure that you're safe, to make sure we're building you the best possible future. Real solutions to the real problems we face. A better, stronger Canada for everyone. That is your future to choose. And this is your time to choose it. In this important moment, maybe the most important since 1945, and certainly in most of our lifetimes, who thinks Canadians shouldn't have a say? After making it through 17 months of nothing like we've ever experienced, Canadians deserve to choose what the next 17 months, what the next 17 years and beyond will look like. And I know that we have the right plan, the right team, and the proven leadership to meet that moment. So to the other parties, please explain why you don't think Canadians should have the choice, why you don't think that this is a pivotal moment. Because I'm focused on our real plan. I'm focused on the path forward with Canadians. So to Canadians, I'm asking you to vote for real, progressive leadership, for strong health care, for affordable homes, for a clean and protected environment. Make your voice heard, have your say, and together, let's move forward for everyone. Je vous demande d'appuyer un gouvernement progressiste et ambitieux, un système de santé fort, du logement abordable, un environnement protégé. Faites-vous entendre, avançons ensemble. Je remercie les membres des médias d'être ici aujourd'hui et je tourne vers vous pour des questions.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va prendre 20 minutes de questions. On commence avec le Toronto Star.
Good morning, sir. Tonda McCharles, Toronto Star. You didn't use the word majority, but I know you would like a majority to enact that plan. However, the NDP says you have the confidence of Parliament. They'd support you in any of these measures that you talk about and all of these ambitions. So how can you justify to Canadians the need for an election that'll cost $500 million in the middle of a fourth wave when you said to Canadians you would not go to the polls before the end of the pandemic?
This is a really important moment in Canada's history. For the past 2 years, for the past 17 months specifically of the pandemic, we've been making really big, really consequential decisions. And in the last election, nobody was talking about what we might do in a pandemic. So the government, and indeed Parliament, needs an opportunity to get a mandate from Canadians, to hear from Canadians on how to end this pandemic, how to build back better in really meaningful ways. As Canadians know, this is a moment where we're going to be taking decisions that will last not just for the coming months, but for the coming decades. And Canadians deserve their say. That's exactly what we're going to give them. Je pense que tout le monde comprend qu'on est dans un moment extrêmement important de notre histoire en tant que pays. Les dernières années, les 17 derniers mois, ont vu des décisions énormes prises par le Parlement, prises par le gouvernement, pour non seulement passer à travers la pandémie, mais pour jeter les bases d'une société plus juste, plus forte, plus prospère pour tous, en relançant l'économie. Et je pense que c'est important que les Canadiens puissent se faire entendre sur comment ils veulent en finir avec cette pandémie, comment on va rebâtir en mieux. On est dans un moment où les Canadiens sont de plus en plus vaccinés, mais on n'est pas passé à travers cette pandémie encore, et comment on va la finir mérite d'avoir une décision et un choix fait par les Canadiens sur les mois à venir et sur les décennies à venir.
Following up.
What do you say to people who think that in gambling like this in the middle of a public health crisis, that if you don't get a majority, you should resign, your political future's at stake? Will you resign?
I think Canadians know that our democracy is strong. I think Canadians know that we are coming through this pandemic, that it's not over yet, and people need to continue to step up and get vaccinated to keep themselves and their loved ones safe. And that's certainly something I'm going to keep reminding people about every single day over the coming weeks. That people need to continue to do their part, protect their communities, protect each other, protect our kids who can't yet get vaccinated because they're under 12. I think this is a moment where Canadians can and should be able to weigh in on what we're going through and on how we're going to build a society that is stronger and better and learns from the challenges we've all experienced and the sacrifices we've all made through the worst of this pandemic. The pandemic is not over, and we're going to be taking consequential decisions on how we finish with this pandemic. And I think it's Canadians' right to weigh in on that.
Next question.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Ashley Burke, CBC News. Sorry, Mr. Trudeau. During the last sitting of Parliament, you managed to survive the throne speech. You managed to get your budget passed, as well as get legislation through. Can you tell Canadians what your thinking is, why you need to have an election now in order to continue to govern, and provide some concrete examples of what you feel the opposition has prevented you from accomplishing?
I think all Canadians get that this is a historic moment we are living through. Government, and indeed Parliament, has enacted significant measures to support Canadians through an unprecedented crisis. And we've done it in a way that met the urgency and the intensity of what we all went through over the past many, many months. But we're at a moment now when many, many Canadians are vaccinated, many more are continuing to get vaccinated, where I think it's right for Canadians to be able to pronounce themselves on where we're going, on how we get through this, on what the next steps are for fighting the pandemic as we face a fourth wave, but also what the next steps are for rebuilding our communities, our society, our country, so that it is better and more resilient for years to come. Canadians need to have their say. Nobody asked anyone how they thought we should manage a pandemic in the 2019 election. And together, Parliament and indeed Canadians have done incredibly well. We are leading the world on vaccinations. We've stepped up to protect our loved ones, and Canadians are continuing to step up. But it's time we had a national conversation, a national direction on those next steps. And that's exactly what we're going to be able to do over the next 6 weeks.
Following up.
Or however many weeks there are.
Can you also explain to Canadians who are tuning in why you are calling this election now when there are thousands of people in Afghanistan who you've promised to help, who are in severe danger of being captured or killed, and you're doing this on a day when you've just announced that the embassy is closing?
Again, we are extremely concerned about the situation in Afghanistan, and I can assure you that officials and indeed ministers continue and will continue to weigh in on protecting Canadians, getting Canadians safely out of Afghanistan, and continuing to step up, as Canada has so many times around the world, to bring people to safety. We will be accepting in 20,000 Afghans into Canada, and that means, once again, as Canadians have so many times, they get to step up and welcome people into their homes, into their communities who are fleeing horrific violence, building a better life for themselves, for their families, and through that work, building a better life for all Canadians. It's something that we've done. It's something we're going to continue to do. And our democracy and our democratic institutions are strong enough to be able to ensure that even as we do this important work for Afghanistan, we're able to check in and make sure that Canadians have their voice on the extraordinarily pressing issues facing them here in this country, right now and for the coming years. Nous demeurons extrêmement préoccupés par la situation en Afghanistan. Depuis des années, le Canada s'est engagé pour améliorer le sort et l'avenir du peuple afghan. Et c'est avec une grande tristesse qu'on voit les événements qui se déroulent en Afghanistan. Et je peux vous assurer que nos diplomates, nos fonctionnaires et nos ministres, et moi-même, je viens juste de recevoir un briefing sur l'état des choses sur le terrain ce matin, nous allons continuer de faire le travail important pour ramener au Canada tous les Canadiens et assurer qu'on accepte 20 000 Afghans et leurs familles dans les mois à venir. Mais notre démocratie est assez robuste et nos systèmes sont assez forts que pendant qu'on fait tout ça, on peut aussi donner à tous les Canadiens une chance de s'exprimer sur comment nous allons continuer notre travail pour en finir avec cette pandémie en tant que pays et pour rebâtir en mieux pour les années et même les décennies à venir, parce qu'on est dans un moment extrêmement important dans l'histoire de notre pays.
Merci. Prochaine question.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Can you please clarify what the government will still do for the former interpreters and other embassy staff who are Afghans who are still in Afghanistan? Will those people still be brought back to Canada, and how?
The security situation on the ground is extremely fast evolving. We are in close contact with our allies, with the Americans who've increased their troop presence on the ground to secure the airport and the green zone in Afghanistan, in around Kabul. We will continue to work to get as many Afghan interpreters and their families out as quickly as possible, as long as the security situation holds. And we will continue to work over the coming months to resettle refugees who will flee Afghanistan, who will look to come to start new lives in Canada. We've talked about 20,000 of them, and that's something that we're able to do because Canadians will once again open their homes, their communities, and their hearts to people fleeing from violence in far-off parts of the world. At the same time, I want to take a moment to thank all the members of the Canadian Armed Forces, past and present, those who fought so incredibly bravely and saw fellow CAF members fall by the wayside for our years of engagement in Afghanistan, but also those who are on the ground right now, continuing to work to support the people who've supported Canadians in our time there. Continue to be there as we speak, working to get as many people out to safety as possible. Our Canadian Armed Forces do an extraordinary job in stepping up, in being there to promote Canadian values, to help people around the world. And today, like every day, they deserve our recognition and thanks.
Following up.
Our reporters, not just with the Globe, but from many media outlets, are being flooded with calls from former interpreters and their family in tears, fearing for their life. Meantime, the embassy in Canada has been evacuated, and your government says they're on their way home. So how will you bring these people home, and when will that happen?
We continue to work to process and support people seeking to flee Afghanistan and come to Canada in safety. Obviously, the security situation is extremely concerning on the ground, and the protection of Canadians and our armed forces are top of mind. But we continue to do the work on allowing and enabling people who've been there for Canadians, whether it's interpreters or drivers or security or whatever, to make sure that they're coming to safety. There are also human rights activists and civil society leaders, journalists, and community leaders who we are working with to try and make sure that we are offering them the safety and the future that they deserve.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Raymond Filion de TVA. M. Trudeau, bien des Canadiens ce matin risquent de se demander, est-ce que c'est responsable pour le chef du gouvernement de s'absenter, de prendre la route pendant 5-6 semaines, alors que la crise n'est pas terminée? La 4e vague commence. Est-ce que c'est responsable?
Je pense que c'est extrêmement important d'offrir aux Canadiens, dans ce moment extrêmement important, un choix sur comment nous allons continuer la lutte contre cette pandémie qui, comme vous dites, n'est pas terminée encore. Mais dans un moment où la grande majorité des Canadiens sont vaccinés et d'autres continuent à se faire vacciner, et je vais dire qu'à tous les jours de cette campagne, je vais être là pour continuer d'encourager et demander à tous ceux qui ne se sont pas fait vacciner de se faire vacciner et de les encourager à faire. Mais je pense que c'est important que dans un moment où les choix qu'on fait en tant que Parlement, en tant que gouvernement, vont avoir un impact direct dans la vie des gens pendant cette crise, mais aussi pour les années à venir, je pense que c'est la chose importante à faire, d'offrir aux Canadiens leur choix et de faire entendre leur voix sur comment nous allons continuer de passer à travers une pandémie dont personne ne parlait la dernière fois qu'on était en élection. En 2019, on ne savait pas que ça s'en venait. Je pense qu'on a fait une job en tant que Canadiens d'un bout à l'autre de ce pays assez extraordinaire au niveau des vaccinations, au niveau d'être là les uns pour les autres. Mais je pense aussi que c'est important que les Canadiens puissent se prononcer sur les prochaines étapes à suivre pour en finir avec cette pandémie et pour rebâtir en mieux pour les prochaines années et décennies.
Pourquoi ne pas attendre quelques mois que la crise soit terminée? 1 et 2, pour revenir à la question de ma collègue à laquelle vous n'avez pas répondu, si vous n'obtenez pas la majorité que vous cherchez dans cette élection, allez-vous démissionner?
Je pense que c'est extrêmement important de souligner à quel point on est dans une meilleure situation en tant que pays à cause des efforts que les Canadiens ont faits. Nos travailleurs de santé, nos travailleurs de première ligne qui ont fait une job extraordinaire pour passer à travers cette pandémie, de nous garder en sécurité, mais aussi les Canadiens qui ont fait des sacrifices énormes en restant chez eux, en étant là les uns pour les autres et surtout en se faisant vacciner à des nombres records. On est en tête de liste de la planète en termes de vaccination. On est en train de faire des barbecues, on est en train d'aller dans les supermarchés. La vie commence à revenir un peu plus à la normale, même avec cette quatrième vague qui vient. Et je pense que les gens comprennent que notre démocratie et nos institutions sont assez robustes pour pouvoir fonctionner même dans des moments difficiles. Et justement, dans un moment difficile et où les décisions prises par le Parlement, par le gouvernement, vont avoir un impact énorme sur la vie des gens dans les mois à venir et dans les années à venir, c'est important que les Canadiens se fassent entendre.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Catherine Lévesque, la presse canadienne. Je vous pose la question pour la troisième fois. Si vous formez un gouvernement minoritaire, à la fin de cet exercice, allez-vous démissionner?
Nous sommes dans un moment où les Canadiens méritent d'avoir le choix de se faire entendre pour se prononcer sur les prochaines étapes de lutte contre cette pandémie et surtout, comment on va rebâtir en mieux. Et j'ai dévoilé au cours des dernières années mes valeurs, ma perspective sur comment on va faire pour rebâtir en mieux. J'ai démontré que j'ai l'équipe et le plan pour améliorer le sort pour les millions de Canadiens qui sont inquiets, mais qui comprennent qu'on est dans un moment où les choix qu'on est en train de faire sont essentiels. Les Canadiens vont se prononcer sur quel mandat sera donné au Parlement et au gouvernement. Moi, ma job et mon engagement envers les Canadiens, c'est que je vais continuer d'être là pour appuyer les Canadiens, comme je dis depuis le début, aussi longtemps que ça prendra, avec tout ce que ça prendra.
Très bien. Vous n'avez pas tout à fait répondu à la question, mais je vais passer. En 2019, vous avez choisi de commencer votre campagne en Colombie-Britannique. Maintenant, vous la commencez au Québec. Je me demandais quelle sera l'importance du Québec dans cette élection-ci, et est-ce que vous pensez obtenir une majorité grâce aux circonscriptions du Québec? Merci.
La dernière campagne, je l'ai commencée chez moi en Colombie-Britannique. Cette fois-ci, je m'en vais chez moi à Montréal cet après-midi. Je me retrouve chez moi partout au pays. Et l'important, c'est pas nécessairement qu'est-ce qu'on fait à chaque jour, c'est comment on va pouvoir entendre et s'engager avec les Canadiens qui vont avoir un choix important à faire dans cette élection sur comment on va continuer la lutte contre la pandémie, comment on va rebâtir en mieux. Et dans toutes les différentes parties du pays, il va y avoir différentes préoccupations. Je pense que donc, cette élection, c'est une occasion d'entendre très clairement les préoccupations et la perspective des Canadiens. Et évidemment, le Québec va être important pour moi en tant que Québécois, mais tout le pays est important. Parce que c'est ensemble qu'on a passé à travers cette pandémie, en travaillant avec les premiers ministres des provinces de façon jamais vue, de collaborer sur de grandes choses, que ce soit les garderies, que ce soit la lutte contre la pandémie et l'aide pour les petites entreprises, que ce soit pour la lutte contre les changements climatiques. On a toujours été là pour travailler avec tous les Canadiens d'un bout à l'autre de ce pays. On va continuer de l'être.
Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. You've had a lot of announcements in the last couple of weeks, even this morning, new child care agreements, long-term care agreements with provinces. You're insisting that you need an election to go to the people to get a mandate, but you're doing all of these things. You didn't wait for an election. So if you can do all of those things without an election, why do you need a mandate further?
This is about giving Canadians an opportunity to weigh in at a really pivotal time. Yes, you talk about the child care agreements that we've signed with 8 different provinces and territories and are going to ensure that millions upon millions of Canadians have access to affordable child care. Well, this is something that we talked about in the 2019 election. We talked about it again in the 2021 budget, and we're moving forward on that. But there are many things in regards to ending this pandemic, in regards to building back better, that we didn't talk about 2 years ago in the 2019 election, that I think Canadians have a right to weigh in on. We've seen situations where conservative backbenchers have referred to some of this government's decisions as tyrannical in terms of how we're creating mandates for vaccination of public servants or vaccination of people on trains and airplanes. Well, the answer to tyranny is to have an election. And I think people who disagree with this government or disagree with this direction should have an opportunity to make themselves heard. And that's what this election is all about. It's allowing Canadians to weigh in. It's allowing Canadians to be heard, allowing Canadians to, in this moment where we are so strongly vaccinated and looking towards the future, not just the end of this pandemic, but how we build back better, looking for an opportunity to make sure the decisions being taken in Parliament and by government are reflective of the hopes and dreams of Canadians.
I'm also curious, with the fourth wave in Canada clearly underway and there's risks of having a pandemic election, what do you think those biggest risks are, and is that worth it to you?
I think obviously with the rise in numbers, case numbers amongst the unvaccinated, that does represent a risk. And that's why it's going to be so important that we continue, all parties, to encourage everyone across this country to continue to get vaccinated. If you haven't gotten your first dose yet, get your first dose. If you're waiting for your second dose, book it now. We need to make sure that as many Canadians as possible are protected against this disease. Because there are Canadians, kids under 12, immunocompromised Canadians who for medical reasons can't get protected, who are going to be relying on everyone else who can get vaccinated to keep them safe. My kids have to get tested and show vaccinations before they go to summer camp, the older ones. We're expecting kids to be vaccinated in many different situations, and they're stepping up for that. I think it's the least adults can do to step up and get vaccinated to protect those kids who can't get vaccinated yet. And that's the message we're going to keep pushing out there, that people need to continue to get vaccinated. And we're going to keep moving forward on measures that both encourage people to get vaccinated, but also make it more difficult for unvaccinated people to spread the disease to others. This is an important principle that this government is taking, and it's certainly something that, amongst others, Canadians have a right to weigh in on, and that's what this election will be about.
Thank you. We'll take one last question.
Bonjour, Juliane Lapointe de Radio-Canada. Monsieur Trudeau, vous dites vouloir entendre le choix des Canadiens, mais pour plusieurs Canadiens, leur choix est clair, ils n'en veulent pas d'élection. Qu'est-ce que vous dites à ceux qui se sentent trahis parce que les fonds publics vont servir à une campagne alors qu'ils ont dû, eux, se serrer la ceinture pendant des mois?
Je pense que les gens comprennent à quel point on n'est pas dans les temps normaux. On est en crise de pandémie. On est en train de réfléchir à comment on va rebâtir en mieux notre société. On a un gouvernement et un Parlement qui, depuis 17 mois, ont pris d'énormes décisions qui vont avoir des impacts sur la vie des Canadiens pour des années à venir. Je pense qu'on est dans un moment où les Canadiens méritent de pouvoir se faire entendre, de pouvoir exprimer leur voix et leur choix sur comment on va en finir avec cette pandémie, comment on va passer à travers les années à venir, comment on va rebâtir en mieux. C'est ça la démocratie. Ça donne l'opportunité à des Canadiens de se faire entendre et de choisir la direction du gouvernement, la direction du Parlement. Et donc, les Canadiens vont pouvoir et devraient se faire entendre dans cette pandémie, dans cette élection, sur la pandémie et sur l'avenir. Je sais qu'il y a des millions de Canadiens à travers ce pays qui veulent qu'ils soient entendus, qui veulent s'exprimer sur les décisions qu'on est en train de faire, sur les choix qu'on va faire dans les mois et les années à venir. Et cette élection, c'est leur occasion de faire justement ça.
Un nouveau gouvernement, ça veut nécessairement dire une période d'ajustement, des nouveaux députés, des gens qui vont devoir apprivoiser un nouveau travail aussi. Alors, comment vous prévoyez que ce soit possible d'être prêt à remettre rapidement la machine en marche, surtout à une époque où la 4e vague pourrait avoir frappé fort le pays après des élections?
Tout d'abord, le travail du gouvernement pour continuer à protéger les Canadiens continue pendant la pandémie, tout comme on va pour le travail nécessaire vis-à-vis de l'Afghanistan, vis-à-vis Haïti, où ils font encore une fois face à un terrible événement qui nous brise le cœur. Le gouvernement et nos partenaires dans les provinces vont continuer de faire le travail pour garder les Canadiens en sécurité dans les semaines à venir. Nous allons évidemment accueillir avec grand enthousiasme des nouveaux députés que les Canadiens vont envoyer pour être leurs représentants à Ottawa dans les différents partis. Et je sais que cette capacité que les Canadiens vont avoir de choisir quel mandat ils vont donner au gouvernement, de choisir quel plan ils veulent pour l'avenir de ce pays, pour choisir qui sera dans ce Parlement, qui va prendre des décisions extrêmement importantes dans l'histoire de notre pays. Je pense que c'est un moment important pour tous les Canadiens et j'ai bien hâte de présenter notre vision et de partager avec les Canadiens mon optimisme pour l'avenir de ce pays, tous ensemble. I think one of the things we know is that even while there's an election going on, the work of our government continues. Whether it's dealing with Afghanistan or dealing with the heartbreak of yet another terrible earthquake in Haiti, or whether it's continuing to do the necessary work to keep Canadians safe through this pandemic and work with our partners across all the provinces who are themselves working very hard on dealing with this fourth wave amongst unvaccinated people. Our institutions are strong. The opportunity we have right now for Canadians to make themselves heard and to send, in many cases, new representatives to Ottawa to be their voices for their communities in Ottawa, to be able to have their choices resonate not just through the end of this pandemic, but into the coming years and decades as we build back better. This is a moment in which Canadians deserve to have their voices heard. Canadians deserve to make their choices. And like I said, I'll leave it for the others to explain why they don't think Canadians should get to weigh in this extraordinarily consequential, historic moment.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui. This is what ends today's presser.
Merci tout le monde.
There you go, Sean.